Assalamu alaikum. Today we're going to talk about the common threats that Muslim activists may be facing. And I just want the audience to know that in America, this country was founded on principles of liberty, freedom, of justice, and we have a constitution that was written for the people to control the government. And there was a reason for a constitution saying that we had inalienable rights, because as American citizens, we didn't want our government taking our freedoms and our liberties away. Today, our government is moving in a new direction and challenging these basic principles. In the name of security, our government is passing new laws to keep us safe. And I'm for security. I'm for our families to be safe, and I want our communities to be safe. But in the name of security, the government says it needs new laws to protect us. And some of those laws are challenging the freedoms that we have understood for the last 200 years. One piece of legislation that our audience should be aware of is a piece of legislation that's referred to as the Patriot Act. After 9/11, the government said it needed new laws to prosecute the war on terror. And they passed legislation referred to as the Patriot Act. And inside the Patriot Act, there are many new laws or statutes that our government is using to keep us safe. One of those laws is referred to as the Material Support Statute. And this is what I want to focus on today when I share with you the legal challenges that our Muslim activists may be facing. The Material Support Statute is a law that says that it is against the law for any U.S. citizen or any resident living in the United States to provide material support to a designated terrorist or a terrorist organization. Now, that makes sense on many levels. We have the war on terror. We want to be safe. So if somebody is, quote, materially supporting a terrorist or a terrorist organization, it should be against the law. And I agree with the spirit of that law. But when we define material support, we find that the government tells us that anything that is considered monetary support, weapons, any personnel, any resources, any expert advice, any assistance, or any benefit that can, or anything that can be considered a benefit to a terrorist or a terrorist organization is a violation of this statute, then we need to ask ourselves if we really understand what this law implies. Now, on the surface, if you give weapons or money or bullets, and people can easily identify what appears to be material support. But our government today is taking this law, this statute, and applying it in a very liberal fashion to selected people that it wants to send a message to. And that message needs to be understood by the Muslim community and by the activists in our community. The government says that this material support statute could cause someone to be indicted for anything that the government considers a benefit to a terrorist organization. Let me ask you a question. If Khalil Meek left Chicago today and I got on a plane to fly to Somalia, and my purpose of going to Somalia was to help people, the only reason I went there was to help people who were in need. And tomorrow I opened a charity. And I put up a sign that says, if you're hungry, come eat. And tomorrow I fed over 200 people. After feeding them, some of the brothers come up to me and say, Khalil, we think you should know that 3 people who came today and ate your food, they're associated with a group called Al-Shabaab. Now, Al-Shabaab is designated. So if that happened, that would technically mean that I fed 3 terrorists. Would that be considered material support? If I'm still in Somalia and I don't speak the language and I need a haircut, and I look around and the only thing I can find is a shop that has a barber pole, that's red and white pole that's just spinning, so I assume it's a barber shop. And I walk in and I just point to my head, and a guy, he just points to the chair. So I sit down and he cuts my hair. When he's finished, he holds up 10 fingers, so I give him $10. Assalamu alaikum. I got a haircut. After my haircut, I pick up the newspaper and I see a picture of my barber in the paper. So I read the article, and the article says my barber is associated with Al-Shabaab. And I gave him $10. Is that material support? Let's say I'm still in Somalia and I say, I want to speak to the leader of Al-Shabaab. Take me to him. I want to tell him something. So they say, come with me. And I go to the leader and I say, hey, I think what you're doing causes more harm than good. And that this conflict will eventually end, and the sooner it ends, the better. And here's some advice from the Prophet, peace be upon him. Here's advice from Jesus, peace be upon him. Maybe Jimmy Carter, an ex-president. Here's the best roadmap to peace ever. Please follow this. Assalamu alaikum. I gave advice to a terrorist. Is that material support? Now, the reason I ask you these questions is because the government has been asked these questions. Many charities, Muslim, non-Muslim, people that are active all over the world, people that are helping others in conflict zones. They have no politics. They've understood that we have this new law, and yet when they think about how it could be applied, they're confused. So they ask the government these questions for clarity or for advice. And the government has refused to answer the questions because the government doesn't give advice. It says, read the statute. So a group of people got together and said that, you know what, we have to have clarity. So there was a lawsuit that was initiated. It's called the Humanitarian Law Project. It was led by David Cole, a constitutional scholar at Georgetown University. And this lawsuit went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled and said that we're not going to be able to fix all of the problems by changing the definition. That's not where we need to focus our effort. We're actually going to need to allow the Department of Justice to continue to use its discretion. And if the Department of Justice thinks what it sees fits the definition of material support, they can indict. They can charge you with a crime. Then they can take you to court and argue to a jury. The reason they think a set of facts is material support. And if the jury agrees, then the jury can convict. And you'll get your clarity in court. Now, what we have to understand as Muslims and as activists is that in this environment, the government having that statute and the ability to interpret a set of facts can accuse people of helping a terrorist or a terrorist organization in many ways. And we see this in our courtrooms with the government being very creative in its ability to indict people. We've seen people that have done nothing but feed orphans, widows, and children and provide humanitarian aid be charged with material support. We've seen people who have actually just through their computer received a document from overseas that was written by a terrorist or a terrorist organization, and they have translated the message from the original language into the language that they're in, the country they're in, English. And just for translating the document so people could read what somebody else had written, they've been indicted. We've seen that when we go out and we make speeches and when we talk about issues of other countries, that our government is listening to those words, and if they can take a set of what would be considered legal speeches, legal thoughts, legal actions, and combine them together to conclude that as a whole it equals criminal conduct, they've actually prosecuted people under this material support statute. Now, the reason I share this with you is because some people just want to know the facts. They just want to know what's going on in a certain area. They want to know who's doing what, when, and where because they want to understand. But in that process, the understanding can be construed as a benefit to a terrorist organization. And people are facing legal challenges. There are suits pending of just activists who have traveled overseas to learn what's going on, having legal issues. Now, as Muslims living in America, and what the Muslim Legal Fund has done, is to take cases that are political in nature, where there's no crime, there's nobody injured, there's no property damage. Take cases where people are being charged with these material support crimes, and yet there's no physical evidence of any crime, and a lot of times the outcome of what they do is helping others who need it. And go to court and fight the government's theory on how to apply this statute. Because we've seen the government use this statute in immigration cases where they want to deny citizenship based on association, based on people's past actions, where the government takes a heavy-handed or a hostile approach to someone who's going through that process, and we help them through it. We've got organizations or charities that have been accused of helping people that benefited, quote, a terrorist organization, and we've helped people go home back to their families because we've won these cases. But what we need to know is that living here in America, we have the politics of fear that are being promoted. We're told that there's organizations out there spending millions of dollars, and they are specifically focused on vilifying the Muslims and the Muslim community, and that we have people that are affected by what they hear, and when this happens, sometimes the people that are affected are in positions of authority or power, and when they have that authority and they have that power and they're acting in a political fashion, that we as a community need to stand up and get it right. We need to slow down and say, wait a minute, we want our freedoms and our liberties and our justice to be equal to everybody's. And so we encourage you, the audience, to learn what's going on, to be educated, to think about what you do before you do it, and to help us help those who have to face these issues in the times ahead. You can learn more about the Muslim Legal Fund by visiting our website at www.mlfa.org. Thank you.